You are listening to The Critical Social Worker, a revolutionary storytelling podcast. I'm your host, Professor Ace, and with the support of the University of Alaska Fairbanks Department of Social Work, we gather voices of revolutionary social workers from around the world, organizers, healers, artists, and educators, people who carry stories that connect us, challenge us, and remind us what it means to be human. Each episode is an offering, a chance to slow down, listen deeply, and feel the ground beneath your feet. Come as you are, stay as long as you need, and remember, no matter your pain, somebody, somewhere feels the same. Welcome to The Circle. Today's guest is David Garlock, a returning citizen and reentry leader whose life argues for rehabilitation over punishment. We talk trauma, incarceration, healing, and writing your own story. Listen closely, because this one carries some hard-earned truths. If you find something meaningful here, the best way that you can support this work is simple. Like, comment, and share the episode, and subscribe to our channels. And if you want to connect, ask questions, or be a part of the conversation, please reach out, because I'd love to hear from you. All right. Welcome to another episode of The Critical Social Worker, a revolutionary storytelling podcast. I'm very happy to be joined by David Garlock this morning, or maybe it's afternoon for you. How you doing?
Oh, I'm doing well in this afternoon. It's 4 o'clock here. I live outside of Philly, so yeah, we're Eastern Standard Time.
Yeah, is it setting into fall over there in Philly?
Oh yeah, it's feeling really good, and the high was 75 today, so it felt really nice. We've had a very hot summer, and what's always funny is like people in Pennsylvania, complain about the humidity. And I'm like, man, go live in Louisiana or Alabama or Florida for 2 weeks, and then we'll talk about the humidity.
Yeah, for sure. Come to Hawaii too. Since a lot of folks maybe tuning in are going to be in Alaska. Obviously, this is brought to you by the University of Alaska Fairbanks Department of Social Work. And Alaska's big, so there's different climates within the state, but they're heading for a drop off real quick. That sun, I think they lose like 9 minutes a day or something like that in some parts of Alaska till it gets 24 hours darkness. And then I'm on the Big Island, up on the north shore of the Big Island in a little sleepy town called Honoka'a in Hawaii. And here, I always say in Hawaii, the fall is actually the summer. So it gets the warmest right now through like November, and then it starts to cool off. If you want to call it that, it cools off, 5 or 10 days. So, like I said, I'm very glad that you reached out to me and that we got this going. One of the things that I've struggled with, not just as a social worker, but just as a human being in general, is I've advocated for incarcerated folks for a long time, whether that's, writing to folks or political prisoners and things like that. And if there's one thing that will make people run the other direction sometimes, it's talking about that kind of thing. I don't know, it makes people uncomfortable or what. And so the conversation's got to be had. We get this more mainstream, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. And what happens is when we start having the conversations, we're able to change or correct the narrative, and that's why I love going around the country and speaking in universities, because so many people have a stereotype or a stigma about what somebody looks like who's incarcerated, and the past 3-4 years, something I've started doing is when I speak someplace, I tell them not to put what I went to prison for on any flyer or pamphlet. And when I have a larger event or in a classroom, I'm like, hi, I'm David Garlock. I'm formerly incarcerated. What do you think I went to prison for? The number one answer is fraud. So they look at me, they see a white guy that is well-dressed and sounds educated. So it's got to be something nonviolent, has to do with money, Really, no one says anything violent either. I had one person recently, they're like, well, you were involved with the murder, but you didn't actually commit the murder. You were just there, And it's always hilarious, to think that they want to stay so far away from saying that I went to prison for a violent offense. But on the other side, one of the funniest things that ever happened was I was speaking at Texas Christian University like in 2021, and there was this blonde girl in the front row who said murder. And I was like, why would you say murder? She's like, "Your 2 earrings." I was like, I'd understand a teardrop tattoo or something, but 2 earrings is like, wow, okay, that's the new thing for people who go to prison for murder.
Yeah, I heard that one before. That's interesting. But it is funny all the it's not funny, but it's ironic the assumptions that folks do have. And I wonder if you came as a, you know, just throwing this out there like a black guy in a sweatsuit or something, what they would have assumed what the answer would be there, probably something much different.
Oh, definitely, it would be a more violent offense, and it would be assault, it would be murder, it would be drug trafficking, different
Mhm.
things like that, And the reason I do that is where we can have that conversation about stereotypes and the way that we perceive people, and the way that society has ingrained in us the way that we're to look at different populations, white people, oh, they're safe, they're this or that. But if you look at somebody who's black or brown skin, you have to be mindful of them. You have to be careful, clutch your purse, make sure you put your hand on your back pocket where your wallet is, And it's so incredible, to start off with that conversation and to begin to challenge those stereotypes, because that's what's necessary in this conversation.
Yeah, for sure. And, those myths have been told since the beginning of American time, so it's deeply ingrained. One thing I noticed about the way you write your bios and whatnot is I didn't see formerly incarcerated. I think you put returning citizen. Is that what it says?
Yeah, so it's either returning citizen, formerly incarcerated, because we have to begin to change the narrative in the way that we speak about people too. I don't use the terms inmate, convict, felon, anything like that, because that's a dehumanizing term that is saying that this is who I am, this is who I'm intrinsically is, and I can never change. So if I use formerly incarcerated, what I'm saying is, yes, at one point I was incarcerated, or if I say that I'm a person who committed murder. Yes,
Mhm.
I'm somebody who took a person's life when I was 19 years old, but that's not who I am 26 years later. I've matured, I've worked on myself, I've graduated college, and I've done other things, and that's how I'm defined now. I always say this too: your past doesn't define you, but it educates you. What defines you is what you do today and what you do tomorrow.
Yeah. And life is should be all about redemption and being able to figure out something because we don't get to choose the life that we get when we're brought into this world and when we're children and coming up, and many of us go through a lot of struggles, and sometimes, like, let me just do some self-application here. I at one time was involved in some pretty big drug dealing stuff going on, ended up being took that slide and ended up being a homeless drug addict. But when I really look back and reflect, it's just pure luck or something that there's so many times that I could have been arrested and sent to prison. And you think of how different things could have ended up, and the things you may have to do to survive and wait while you're incarcerated. And so it's not always about just what you've been charged with or what you've been convicted with. I could have been convicted and wasn't. And so does that make me better than you because I wasn't? It makes me more fortunate, I guess, in some ways.
But the thing too is it's always powerful, especially when we think about like social work, what's one of the key things? Self-disclosure.
Mhm.
So, I mean, what you're doing right there is you're putting yourself on the glass. Some people might have not known that about you before this episode. And now they're like, snap, Professor
Mhm.
Ace had this type of thing happen in his life. And it allows us to satients and to reach people that other individuals won't. So I went to a Christian university after I got out of prison in 2014. It's Eastern University outside of Philadelphia, and the second week I was there, they put my story in the newspaper, in the school paper. I helped write the article, but it was still like this moment, like, oh wow, I'm butt booty naked in front of everybody. They're gonna know everything about me. How am I going to deal with this? But the reception was so powerful, because they saw this amazing story about grace, about redemption, of second chances, and how I was able to turn my incarceration around where I better myself, I improved myself. I began my education in prison and I wanted to continue to further it when I got out. But they could have easily, like, rejected me, but they were there, open arms, just welcomed me and loved on me, and it was there in that self-disclosure where I put everything out there, and it opened so many different doors. There were some individuals who had family members getting ready to get out of prison, so I was able to help them create reentry plans. My degree is in urban studies, criminal justice, and social work. So in my criminal justice and social work classes, I was able to do a lot of self-disclosure to help people have a different look around social work, a different look about the criminal justice theories and things like that, where they could see how they played out in my own life, and it's so powerful when we think about self-disclosure, but social workers, we always have to remember, how much do we self-disclose?
Yeah, it's a tricky thing, and I think that's a good topic. Renee in the chat said that I feel like it makes you more relatable and helps people to feel comfortable sharing their story. But let me be honest with you, it's only been recently that I've been willing to self disclose. And for the longest time, I was, I don't know, scared and embarrassed. And I would think, hey, people are going to judge me if they know this. And that could be like a female that I was, say, dating or attracted to, but especially in like a professional sphere at the university. When I first started teaching, I wouldn't, I mean, maybe like with a student I trusted or something that needed my help, maybe I would self disclose, but I was afraid of it. And it wasn't until I became more confident and secure, now I have a family, I'm successful. I don't have so much to worry about, no matter what happens to me, I always have something to fall back on, if you know what I mean. And I'm curious for you, what, were you ever nervous about it? Did you hesitate at first, or have you always been willing? How did that come about?
I mean, I've always been willing. What what was kind of funny is my first week out of prison, so Brian Stevenson and the Equal Justice Initiative helped both my brother and I obtain our parole. And so I got out of prison April 1st, 2013. That Sunday I was at church, and this is a church that had a prison ministry. So I had like a list of 7 or 8 churches I was going to attend because they had amazing prison ministries. And it wasn't just the prison ministry, it was also, these were individuals who were open, who were raw, who had lived experience too.
Hmm.
And that's one thing that's so powerful when you're incarcerated. It's one thing to have a preacher come in and to preach, but it's another thing when you have somebody who has that lived experience come in and to speak, and you're able to see, wow, that dude was in prison. Now look at what they're doing, and that's why I love to go back into prisons. That's why I love speaking in universities, because it's that ability to empower somebody and to allow them to see that, that past experiences don't have to continue to define them. And so here it is, my first week out of prison. I'm at this church and I meet some people at the church. They take me back and introduce me to Bishop Kyle, who's the head pastor of the church. And everybody's like, you don't meet him before a service. So he's like, hey, can I share your story from the podium? I'm like, sure, go ahead. So I go back and sit down, saw some more folks from the prison ministry. I sit down just expecting him to be like, oh, David Garlock just got a prison. No. He's like, can David Garlock come up here? And I'm like, dude, you did not tell me all that. You said you wanted to share my story. And so I went up there and he asked me about a little bit about my story, about the prison ministry, the impact it had on me. And it was really from then, I mean, I'm 110% extroverted. So I'll talk to a tree expecting it to talk back to me. But I've always been open about my past, about my story. And I mean, from then on, it just became something that I was always willing to share. There's aspects that I don't talk about because of the connotations of it and really the depth of it into the story, like how my brother and I took the individual's life who we murdered or other things like that. But otherwise, I'm open. I want to be open. But one thing I talk about is, like, when I talk about trauma, I created this analogy about trauma where you have somebody who's like a scab, and you have somebody who's like a scar. So this person that's like a scab, we know that if you have a scab on your arm and your child brushes it off, it's going to bleed, it's going to be painful, but then another scab is going to come up. Now, if the next day your child brushes it off, you're going to go through the same process. And that's somebody who hasn't dealt with trauma. They go through this cycle of they're good for a little bit, something triggers them, they're back in that point where they were 8 years old and they were harmed, and they're stuck there until they have that moment where they can move on. Then you have somebody that's like a scar. If I have a scar and my son brushes against my scar, it's not going to be painful. I'm not going to bleed. But I can remember that when I was 13 years old, I fell off my bike. I had 13 stitches, and the nurse's aide was really cute. And I wish I could have talked to her, but she's a little bit older. And so we have all these different memories about that thing, but it doesn't cause us that pain. But another key component about that is we get to take that scar and we get to go to the person who has a scab and let them know that healing is possible. And when I speak, so many people come up to me afterwards and talk about their own abuse stories and things like that. And that's why it's so powerful for us to share what we've been through, because we give other people hope. We give them the ability to see that healing is possible and that it's a lifelong journey.
Yeah, that's very beautifully put. And I would say from my experience, when I did start talking about it and starting being honest, then it actually drew people to me rather than push people away. And there's a couple of good quotes here in the or comments here in the chat. Kate says one of my favorite quotes is that life is a classroom, not a courtroom. And then David, another one of my students, says, Professor Ace, I was nervous to talk about my past incarceration and addiction for a short period of time, but I've learned that telling my story will help others. And so, we're seeing that reflected right here in the chat and in the classroom. And I have a lot of students that come through that are very similar to me that have had their own struggles and fought through it. And now, it's pretty admirable that they want to be social workers and that they want to go out and, contribute to the world by making it better and helping other people. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, what we think about too is, we think about that saying, hurt people. But so many people want to stay there. But there's two aspects that I always think about, and in that, helped people help people and healed people heal people. And, with us having these different pains, these experiences in life, at times, what can we do? We can just bottle it up, and keep it to ourselves because of fear, because, oh, what is somebody going to think about me? How are they going to react, But when we're able to open up, when we're able to talk about this, we're able to allow people to see what's possible in their life. I mean, at Eastern University, I've been involved with our prison education program since it started in 2015. And I was actually able to co-teach 4 classes. So here I am, somebody who went to prison for murder, coming back into a prison, co-teaching a class. Now, these other incarcerated folks didn't know what to expect when they saw me, but when I shared my story, it hit them. It's like, wait, what? This person went to prison for murder and here he is. He graduated from Eastern and now he's co-teaching. And what do these students begin to believe? They begin to believe that they can take my spot, they can be in my shoes and co-teach a class. And that's what it's about, And hey, David, keep sharing your story. I love it. Just do what you're doing, and just know that, the more you share your story, the bigger the impact you're going to have on those who are in your sphere.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, beautifully said. And I'd say the same for me. Like I've had so many students that have come to me and said, "Hey, professor, I didn't know if I fit in higher education or any of this stuff, but when I saw you and I heard you talk, I knew that I could do it, and I saw myself in you." And to me, that's what it's all about. Yuli, if I mispronounce your name, I'm sorry, but I think Yuli asks, "What gave you the confidence to openly talk about it with other people?"
Well, I mean, a lot of that has to do with my faith, and the strength that I get there. But then always realizing, that there's so much power in our stories, and that I've had other people share stories of what they've been able to overcome, and just seeing how much that helped me. I want to be the same thing. I want to go about and be able to just provide that encouragement, especially, when you deal with people in prison. A lot of the people in prison, they've lost hope. They've lost the ability to dream. And so when they see somebody like me coming back in and to share and to see what I've been able to accomplish in the over 12 years I've been out, that allows them to be able to dream again. They're like, wow, look at what David's done. He graduated college. He's spoken all over the country in universities. He did a TEDx. He's done all these different things. I can do the same thing. And that's what it's about. When I spoke in a prison in Alabama in 2022, and last week I got a message on Messenger from one of the guys that was there. He's been like, I've been out a year. I'm doing well. I just want to thank you for coming in and to share and giving us hope. And that's what it's about. One thing I always tell people is like everywhere we speak, anybody who we share our story with or talk to about different things like that, we're planting seeds.
Right.
Now, we might not always see what that seed yields. We might not see the fruit, but when we are able to see that fruit, it's so awesome. And it it's like one of those superpowers where you're empowered more and you're like, okay, I got to do this more. Who can I go talk to? Where can I go? And it just like recharges me and like, wow, look at the impact that those couple words I had in that prison had on those men.
Yeah, yeah. I when I was going for my BSW, my undergraduate degree, I did my practicum internship at domestic. It was working with domestic violence offenders, and part of that was going into the local jail up in Fairbanks, Alaska. And when I first went in there, just like most people, when you're an intern and you have some doubts and some imposter syndrome and all that, but I'm in there and I'm looking at these guys and I'm like, these guys ain't gonna want to talk to me. And then I couldn't have been more wrong. And I've been reminded of that in several different capacities. But back in that jail, I started talking to the men, and mostly I'd say rather than talking to them, I listened to them. And I found that almost all of them felt that people hadn't listened to them throughout their life and that they had experienced their own trauma. And like, let's say it was they were in there for some kind of domestic abuse or even child abuse. Now, it obviously doesn't excuse what they did. However, when you listen to their story, it makes a hell of a lot more sense. And I'd never heard this before. Everybody knows about the school to prison pipeline, but I'm hearing you say the trauma to prison pipeline. And I'm wondering if you can talk about that a little bit, because that's what I heard from those men that I dealt with.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, so many people want to talk about the school to prison pipeline, and yes, that does affect a lot of people. But really, we have to focus more on the trauma to prison pipeline. So most of the people listening have probably heard of ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. The 10 questions, 5 questions about the individual themselves, 5 about the family setting that they grew up, family unit. The data shows that if you score 4 or more, the likelihood of you having mental health issues, the likelihood of you having addiction issues, incarceration, everything goes up. 90% of women in prison score 4 or more on the ACEs test. 50 to 60% of men score 4 or more on the ACEs test, but put asterisks by there because, with men, things are underreported. To put it in another way, I have a colleague in Philly that runs a reentry home for women. And when these women get out and come into her program, she doesn't ask what sentence they went to prison for. She says, what was his name? And the first time I heard that, it was just like my head going off wait, what did you just ask? Like, what was that question? It's like, what was his name? Because that male figure was the person that started the trauma, or produced the trauma that led them to commit whatever offense they did. I mean, when you think about the trauma to prison pipeline, that goes into the other conversation about the survivor homicide. Just think about the Menendez brothers. They just were set off parole, which I hate. I was really hoping that they would be granted parole because of all the trauma that they experienced in their life. And they're a perfect example of looking at, what would have happened if that trauma was in prison? Would they have committed the offense that they did? A lot of people talk about like, oh, they did it for the money, this happened, that happened, etc. Me personally, I don't believe they did it for the money. I believe that they did it because of the trauma that they endured. The 7 month spending spree wasn't just like them going wild and crazy. It was them like, wow, we're free. This is the first time that we haven't been in this prison of abuse, this prison of trauma. How are we supposed to act, And that's one thing a lot of people don't understand. And people who've never lived or been in that type of traumatic space can't comprehend. But yeah, I mean, and then when we think about the trauma to prison pipeline, what happens when somebody's arrested? That's traumatic. What happens when they go to the county jail? That's traumatic. What happens when they begin the whole trial process? That's traumatic. What happens when they're sentenced? That's traumatic. What happens when they go to prison? That's traumatic. What happens with what they see in prison? That is vicarious trauma. So you have all this trauma of their childhood, and then other trauma and trauma and trauma and trauma compounded on that. And are prisons really set up to deal with mental health issues or to deal with trauma?
No.
No. And then a lot of the times, what do these individuals do to cope with this? They use drugs, they use alcohol, they use other coping mechanisms not to deal with the pain and the hurt. And, that's one thing what was necessary is for more social workers to be able to get involved pre-incarceration, during the incarceration, and then post-release too. We need county jails, we need prisons that will actually allow social workers to do their job. Too many institutions hamstring social workers from actually doing their work and being able to help somebody heal. They're like, you can have conversations, but you can't talk about this, that. It's like, why do I want to come work here? Because I can't do my job.
Yeah, yeah. Tell us a little bit more about the Menendez brothers. I'm sure that many people may not be familiar with the case.
Yeah, so the Menendez brothers, Lyle Menendez was the older brother, and he was molested from 6 years old to 8 years old, and then that's when his dad started molesting his brother Eric, who was 3 years younger than him. Eric was molested from 6 years old to 18. When Eric was 18 and Lyle was 21, they had planned to kill their parents to escape this abuse. So in August of 1989, they killed both of their parents. It was a violent offense. They used shotguns, and I think it was 16 to 18 shots to kill both their parents. And it took them 7 months for them to finally confess. And the reason they confessed to it is because the counselor that Eric was seeing had recorded the confessions. And so they had to confess. And they had two different trials. The first trial, it was a mistrial. They were able to bring up that they were sexually abused in the first trial. The 6 women on the jury wanted them to receive a manslaughter charge. The 6 men wanted them to receive first-degree murder with special circumstances. They retried them right after O.J. Simpson was acquitted, and there was all types of press. There was all type of push on the district attorney's office to get a guilty charge. So in the second trial, they couldn't use the abuse as a defense, and they were found guilty. They weren't given the death penalty. They were given life without parole. They've been incarcerated for over 35 years, and recently they were resentenced to a 50-year to life sentence, and they were actually just had a parole hearing last week and were found didn't get parole.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that sounds like the trauma to prison pipeline to me.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the reasons that I would do a lot of talking about the Menendez brothers is mine and my brother's case is very similar to this. So my brother and I were sexually and physically abused by a non-family member. This started with my brother, he was 13. With me, I was 11. This went on for 8 years. Towards the end of the abuse, it was a lot more physical. He had tried to kill me and my brother numerous times. And in June of 1999, we made the irrational decision to take his life. And with us, it wasn't something that was planned out. It was one of those things where in psychology, it talks about seeing red, where you're filled with this rage and hatred, and all the years of abuse just like filled up, and we took his life. And it took him 4 months to find the body, and so I was 20 when I was arrested. My brother was 23. We had court appointed lawyers, but our case wasn't publicized. It was probably in the Walker County paper and the Birmingham newspaper because the murder happened in Jasper, Alabama. I'm thinking we were going to get the death penalty. I'm thinking we are going to get life without parole because Alabama is the dirty South and they don't play about the death penalty and offenses like that. And so I was really fearful about getting that type of sentence. And the first weekend, I'm just crying myself to sleep because I didn't know what was going to happen. Then I was taken to the county jail or city jail for more questioning on November 1st, 1999. And here I am put in this interrogation room for 7 hours. So I'm thinking about the murder. I'm thinking about the abuse. I'm thinking about everything that transpired and happened. And I finally called the detective in and I confessed. And it was like this huge weight taken off my chest. The detective handcuffs me. We're going back to the county jail. And I asked him, I'm like, am I going to get the death penalty or life without parole? He's like, do you believe in God? I'm like, am I going to get the death penalty or life without parole? He's like, do you believe in God? I'm like, am I going to get the death penalty or life without parole? He's like, do you believe in God? I'm like, yeah, I believe in God. And he's like, you need to seek him now. And that conversation really changed the whole trajectory of my life because it was right then where I told myself, no matter what time, no matter how much time I received, I was going to do the time instead of letting the time do me. And my brother and I, we received 25-year sentences. In the county jail, I was able to get my GED. In prison, I was in a behavior modification program where I was reading these self-help books, and I was reading this book where it was talking about child sexual abuse. And it said that people who are sexually abused as children blame themselves for their abuse. So I was able to have this conversation with 11-year-old David and tell him that it wasn't his fault, and it was so powerful to be able to forgive myself for holding this and blaming myself for something that I had nothing to do with. And yeah, everything that I was doing while I was incarcerated was to better myself and improve myself. And Brian Stevenson and the Equal Justice Initiative started working with us, and they connected me with Eastern University. And what's really interesting is when I got out of prison, when I enrolled into Eastern, I wanted to major in social work and to open up a home for kids and teens to get them off the streets. But my degree ended up being an individualized major, which was urban studies, criminal justice, and social work. And now I get to do all this crazy, amazing work that I do now.
Yeah. If you could go back, well, not necessarily if you can go back, but if you can look back to the young man that you were, what would he have needed to avoid that happening and receive healing and becoming whole rather than the incident happening and then being sent to prison?
Well, I mean, the first thing was parents who I felt I could talk to and tell what was going on. I mean, I scored 10 out of 10 on ACEs. So, I mean, that is one test you do not want to get 100% on. So there was so much trauma, so much pain. So, I mean, my parents weren't able to. I mean, when we were in the county jail, our mom started writing us. And in February of 2000, she asked us, she's like, hey, can you write me a letter and tell me everything that happened to your brother and you? So we sat down one Friday afternoon. We wrote all weekend. Um, I'm one of those people that have small writing, and we wrote 30 pages front and back from the initial abuse to my brother to the night of the murder. And we didn't hear anything back from her until August. And the outside of the letter, I couldn't even comprehend because it was chicken scratch. And later on, I realized it was from my stepdad. And when I opened up the letter, there was a small little note from my stepdad that said, while your mom was writing this letter, she died of a massive heart attack. So My mom had finished my letter and she was halfway through my brother's letter when she passed away. And she was 46 years old. And in the letter, she talked about that she was so sorry about not asking us about what was going on. She sensed things were happening, but she didn't really know. She didn't know how to ask and to have that conversation. And I mean, for about a year and a half, I blamed myself for her death because here I am thinking that that letter was the thing that caused her to die. But then I had to get to that point where it's like, okay, it was this her time to go? And my faith teaches me, I'll see her again. But, that was one of the hardest things as far as being incarcerated. But besides that, just having more services, having somebody at school that I could have talked to and really confided in. But I mean, I think in some districts, in some places, there's better safeguards now. There's better ways that social workers, psychiatrists, psychologists are being more involved. And I think another thing that we have to do is parents have to have conversations with their children. They have to let them know, these are red flags. If somebody's doing this or if this is happening, you need to tell me. I have a 4-year old, when he's able to, I'm going to have discussions as far as grooming, as far as other things like that, and let him know that if any of this is happening, you need to let me know and that I am that trusted person who is going to take care of you, who is going to fight for you. I mean, my brother and I didn't have that because my dad's reaction to everything was kicking everybody out of the house. He didn't know how to deal with us. He had PTSD from Vietnam. My mom really didn't know how to raise us either. And so here we were. We had two parents that really weren't able to be there for us like we needed.
Yeah, and it sounds so familiar to other stories that I've heard. I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Gabor Mate, but we used his book, The Myth of Normal, in a substance abuse class I taught over the summer, and place that people that score high on the ACE score, that have traumatic backgrounds, place that they end up, besides incarceration, sometimes is on the streets, addicted to drugs. And he says that he used to. I think he used to work at as a doctor at, I think it's called the, or what is it called? I can't think what it's called, but like an old hotel that they had turned into a place for home for the most chronic drug users in Vancouver. And he said that out of all the super chronic intravenous drug users, that they had all been sexually abused or super traumatically abused. And that's rough when you think about it, like where the folks are ending up and why we don't have a society or a system or something set up to where, we can help people heal versus, having them end up on the streets or in prison and jail.
I say a lot of it has to begin with, one of the presentations is the trauma to prison pipeline, but the second presentation I have around this topic is how practitioners can help dismantle the trauma to prison pipeline. And the first thing is, we have to get involved before somebody ends up in prison. We have to be able to have these conversations when they're kids, when they're teenagers and they're experiencing this trauma, not after multiple rehabs or after multiple stints in prison, because we can help prevent that. We can help break that cycle where they end up in prison, or end up severely addicted to drugs. Because what are a lot of those people doing? They're just coping. They're trying to numb themselves because they don't want to feel that pain anymore. So if we're able to have those conversations as their kids, as they've just experienced this, we can help bandage what they're going through. Because what do the drugs are? The drugs and alcohol are just a band-aid on a gushing wound. But when you're able to go in and you're able to begin those processes to help them heal, you're able to put stitches on a wound instead of just a little band-aid. That's going to change their whole trajectory. That's going to change how they end up in life. and then what they're able to do. I mean, just like look at your experiences, you know. If you didn't have some of the experiences you had in life, do you think you would be doing what you're doing? Do you think social work would have been that?
No, absolutely. I mean, I don't know. You never know for sure what's going to happen, but I would say, social work chose me and claimed me because of the things that I went through. And I think it's often people are confused when they ask me about this because I'll tell when they say, "Do you regret it all, or would you go back and change it?" And I mean, I didn't take somebody's life, so I think if it was that, I may say that I, would obviously take that back. But when it comes to like the drug use and all the shit that I went through and all that, it was like to me, it was like going to school when I look back at it. It was something that prepared me for the person that I am today, that allows me to help other people and has built the strength and resilience. So I almost look at it again. I hate to say that like being a drug addict was a positive thing, but in some ways it set me up to be exactly who I am today, and I wouldn't have been that without it.
And I always tell people the same thing. You know, they ask me, they're like, if you could change one thing in your life, and they're expecting me to say the abuse or the murder. And I tell them I wouldn't change anything, because if I change anything in my life, I'm not who I am today. I don't have the passion. I don't have the drive. I'm not doing the work I'm doing. And then I also don't have the family I had. You know, I wrote an article in 2021 talking about how I dreamt about a family while I was incarcerated. And the article I was actually writing when I was in my son's room at 2 a.m. in the morning, just looking at his crib, you know, and I wouldn't have what I have. And the impact that I'm having now, I don't think would be anywhere compared if there was any other deviation to my life.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you a deep question. How do you reconcile with the life that was lost?
Well, a lot of it is, you know, in Joel chapter 2, it talks about that God will restore what the cankerworm and the locust has devoured. So I always think that, you know, I don't know what that life would entail, but I can't cry over spilt milk. You know, I can't allow those what ifs to drive me and to think like, what would life have been if I wasn't abused? What would life have been if my parents didn't get divorced? You know, it's really just realizing that everything has happened for a reason, and that right now I'm the author of my story. Before, the abuse was the author of my story, or the abuser was the author of my story. So I've regained the pen to write my story, and I get to write how it plays out from now on. And that's what's so incredible about us being resilient, overcoming the different hurdles in our life, because now we get to define how those play out, you know?
Yeah, very well said. We do have some questions, some comments in the chat. I think Kate's going back to talking about the Menendez brothers, but she says, I think it's also important to point out that because the family was upper class, there was a lot of suspicion over the abuse that they suffered because of the idea that abuse doesn't happen in higher class families. Alice adds, that's true, Kate. We need to all be aware of stereotypes and how we perceive things. It's very true.
But then another thing too is it was 1989. I mean, who thought that a male could be abused back then, you know? I mean, just think about what the prosecutor said, which irked me so much. Is she's like, "Oh, male can't be raped because they lack the right parts." It's like, "Wait, what? Huh? What parts do you need?" You know? But yeah, but I mean, when we think about that, you know, these things don't happen in upper class neighborhoods, you know? It's the same thought process around drug use. You know, like, oh, that, but where's a lot of drugs happening? I When I was 17 and 18 years old, I lived in West Los Angeles. I had friends that lived in Beverly Hills. I went to some pool parties in Beverly Hills, and they had any type of drug, any type of alcohol, everything there. And what's so crazy is there was one party where two cops came in, looked around, and left. I'm talking about they saw all the drugs, they saw all the alcohol, but they didn't do anything. And that's another thing we think about too, is like, okay, where are people policing? You know, it gets into one of the criminological theories, broken windows theory, that police are going to go into areas that have broken windows, have graffiti, have trash all over the place. And those are your areas where you have your black and brown skinned individuals or your poor whites. And that's where police are going to go. They're not going into Beverly Hills. They're not going into Bel Air. They're not going to Pacific Palisades and going in and arresting people who are violating the law.
And that's a really good point. And even if they say they never even went in the place, it's the idea of the space that you have to do what you're doing, you know what I'm saying? Poor people,
Yeah.
where they're gonna be doing it, small apartments, outside, corner, wherever else. Whereas if you got a lot of wealth, you're probably doing it in a big house somewhere. But the trauma can be the same, you know what I'm saying? People act like wealthy folks can't be traumatized. Look at Hollywood and celebrities and all that, and if you look deep enough, you see all that trauma that's going on.
I mean, perfect example is look at Paris Hilton and everything that she experienced and the different group homes that she was made to live in as a teenager, and just how she's become an activist about the abuse, the physical abuse, the sexual abuse, the mental abuse that these teenagers are experiencing, And what's so powerful is, who would have thought that that was happening to Paris 10, 15, 20 years ago? You think like
Mhm.
when she was on her show, like, oh, she's got everything together. But deep down, she had that hurt, that pain. And I mean, I wonder if you feel the same way, but when people ask, they're like, David, how can you talk so openly about what you've endured? And I tell people, the more I talk about it, the more power I have over it. And it's no longer the steering wheel in my back. I get to be the person at the steering wheel and talk about it and just know that it's helping other people.
Yeah, and I liked how you put it earlier about how you were saying that now it's your story now and not the trauma story. I think a mistake that we often make, just as humans, but as social workers too, is we want to know why the behavior, why the drugs, why this, why that, and it should be the question should be why all the pain, why you have so much pain. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
I mean, that goes into like the trauma informed questions. It's not like, why did you do this? Why did you act this way? Why did you? It's like, what happened to you? What were the things that caused you to need the drugs? It's just really the way that we change the questions, and it's just not trying to like just beat somebody over the head. And that goes a lot into like the emotional intelligence, and the different questions there too, and there's so many different aspects of those questions and case management that, we can have such a powerful impact in the way that we talk, and like you said earlier, the way that we listen.
It's we can move on from this, but it's I think people would be really surprised at how many people go through life without feeling like they have somebody to listen to them. And even sometimes, when I was a kid, my mom, she'd say, "You got anger problems, Ace. I gotta send you you got to go see a therapist," or I don't know what she had, a counselor or whatever. But I'd go see them, and I didn't feel like they listened to me. It wasn't until much later when I went to rehab, that I had this counselor named Rick, and I felt like, he didn't buy into my bullshit, and he actually listened to what I had to say. You know what I mean? Go ahead.
Yeah, listening to you is very important. People ask me, they're like, David, in prison, did you go see a counselor? Did you do that? I'm like, yeah, I went and saw a psychiatrist one time and I talked for 5 minutes. He talked for 55 minutes. And his talking was, he was describing what this picture on his wall meant to him and all the different analogies and allegories and everything else. And I'm thinking, like, dude, what is it? What does this have to do with me? This isn't helping me. It's like, I'm not coming back. But it goes back to like what you said. It's like, if he listened to me, if he allowed me to talk and to share the different thoughts I had and what I was going through, it would have been totally different. I always think, everybody talks about, everybody in the world is like, don't be like Job, you don't have a life like Job, But when we think about Job, his friends were really good for 7 days because for the first 7 days, they just sat with him. They didn't say anything, they just sat with him, they were present, and that's what we need a lot of times, just somebody to be there to show that presence, and then they became really bad when they opened their mouth, so, I mean, sometimes we just need those people to come to where we are and just sit with us, and just that presence is what's so powerful.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm teaching a practice class. We're teaching students how to, um, interview people and as social workers. And the number one thing I always have to keep reiterating and reiterating is that you ain't the one that's supposed to be doing the talking. If you're doing a good job in the interview, you ought to be asking some questions here and there and maybe reflecting. But for the most part, the other person should be doing the talking. And it can be hard to get into that. We have a lot of questions in the chat, so I want to honor them, and we have a call
Right?
in. So I'm going to bring Jesse on, and then I promise you all that got questions in the chat. We'll get to him right after we talk to Jesse. So let's bring her on.
Hi, David.
Hey,
Thanks
Jesse.
for sharing your story. I was just wondering, I've noticed a lot that when someone commits a crime in a community and goes to jail for it, when they come back, the people in the community don't let them change. They often hold their past offense against them, and sometimes, depending on what they were doing, they get involved or go back to, like, if they're dealing drugs because that's what they know and that's, I guess, kind of where they feel safe. So I'm wondering if you have any advice or what you would say to someone who's trying to re-enter their community when they're coming up against that judgment and stigma.
Well, I mean, at times, it's kind of like when you think about AA and NA, one of the things they always tell you there is change your playmates and change your places. So at times it might be better for the person to go into a newer community where they're not known and they don't have that history. So that could be one thing. Another thing too is I always tell people, we know the African proverb, it takes a village to raise a child. My spin on that is it takes a village for a returning citizen to be successful. So it takes the person's family, it takes the community, it takes employers, it takes landlords, it takes a place of faith, it takes support groups all coming around walking with this person. So I think that is something that's very integral in allowing people who are coming home from prison to be successful. And if they don't have that, the likelihood of them returning to their old lifestyle is higher. So it's important that we can become that village for people that are coming home. So definitely encourage, if this is about somebody who's getting ready to come home or people in your life, try to be that village for them, or encourage other people in the community to be that village, because for so long, like you said, what have people told them? Oh, you're a drug dealer, you're this, you're that, you're never going to change. But if they have you, if they have other people in the community that are walking with them and are speaking life into them, saying, hey, yes, this happened, but that's not who you are. This is who you are. You can do whatever you want, whatever you put your mind to, you can achieve. That's what's necessary. We have to build people up. We have to begin to speak life into them. We have to tell them what their potential is, because at times they can't see it themselves until other people begin to speak it into them. Then their blinders are taken off and they can see that reality.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Jesse.
Yeah.
Jesse's a superstar student of mine. She's no, I mean that with everything. Jesse is awesome, and so I just want to say thank you, Jesse, for calling in and contributing. I got another question. Yuli asked, "How was the relationship with your family after going through so many traumatic events?"
Well, while we were incarcerated, my dad, grandma, and sister all passed away. So we lost pretty much all of our whole family. My brother and I are really the only immediate family that we have left, and we really don't have a relationship. He really hasn't dealt with the trauma and the pain. So I think really when we have a lot of conversation, it's triggering for him. So that's one thing that's really painful, because I thought that we were going to have a robust relationship when we got out, because when we were in the county jail, we were in the same cell together. And there was a point in time where we were at the same prison together in 2007 and 2008. So I thought we were going to have this healthy relationship, but we don't. It's something I pray about and hope that at some point we're able to restore that relationship. But what's really been helpful now is, I'm married, I have a wife, I have a 4-year-old son. Her parents are like treat me as their own son, so that's great there. We go to this amazing church that we've been involved with for 10 years. I got a pardon in 2021 for the murder charge, and since then I've been able to serve in the elementary. So here I am, somebody that's formerly incarcerated, went to prison for murder, and I'm serving in our kids ministry. I get to pour into the next generation, and it's so powerful. Like I said, as far as the seeds that we get to plant, one of the amazing messages I got from one of the parents a couple years ago was this woman and her two daughters. They were having a Bible study, and the study was about mentors. And so she sent me a direct message on Messenger, and she's like, "Hey, David, I was having this Bible study with the girls, and we were talking about mentors, and I asked them who their mentors were, and she said the youngest one said Mr. David." And I was like, what? And it really impacted me a lot, because society would be like, how can you be a mentor? You went to prison for murder and this and that. But people at church and people who I deal with on a constant basis, forget that I went to prison for murder. Forget I went to prison totally, because they're so familiar with me and who I am today, and not the person I was when I was 19 years old when the offense happened.
Yeah, right on. We got to let's move on to Renee. She says, I know incarceration is different in every state, but I was wondering how safe it is for someone to be uncovering and working on their childhood trauma in prison. I've heard for some, it's not safe to be that vulnerable in prison, but I'm hearing you talk about it while incarcerated. What do you think about this in general or nationwide? And that's a great question.
Well, I mean, it all really depends on where you're at. I began working on it in a behavior modification program, and we actually had different groups where people who were sexually abused could talk about it. I mean, you always have to understand and realize, that, yeah, I mean, prison can be a unsafe space. You have so many people that have gone to prison for different offenses. At times you don't know what somebody's gone to prison for. It's not like they have a name tag that says, "Hi, my name is Billy Joe Bob, and I am a drug dealer," or whatever, and at times people don't talk about what they've gone to prison for. So yeah, you definitely have to be careful. You have to be mindful about how much you're talking about it and who you're talking to it with. At some prisons, I didn't talk about it as much, or there were select few people I talked to it about who I was close to. And when you think about doing time in prison, especially if you've been at the same prison for a long time, these folks that you're doing time with, they become your family. They're rejoicing with you when things are going good. They're crying with you when things happen. And a lot of people in the free world don't really think about that and think about the closeness that you have with these people, with your bunkie or your cellmate or etc. And it's like these folks are like your brothers. I was down in Alabama a couple months ago, and I was able to see two folks that I did time with at two different prisons. And it's always amazing to see them on the other side of the wire, and to see what they're doing and the way that they're thriving. And one of the guys, when he got out a couple years ago, he sent me a message on Messenger, and he's like, "Dave, thank you for always telling me to be better and not bitter." And it's just those type of moments, where it's like, wow, I was able to impact somebody by those words in prison. And yeah, it's incredible to connect with those people that were family on the inside, on this side.
Yeah, right on. Well, Yuli is here again with says I hear stories of parents that say they've tried everything to help their children overcome substance abuse, and after many, many years, they decide to break all communication. So now there is an adult struggling with addiction that has zero support from the people they love. What can we do to help people gain the confidence they need to work on their trauma when they lack family support and motivation?
Well, I mean, I say something like that is that it takes other people in their community or wherever they are to become their family. I mean, you have two types of, just like I said, I mean, the people in prison, they became our family. Family isn't just blood. So if there's people that you see that have these struggles, especially as social workers, we can jump in, we can begin to create relationships with these individuals, and let them know that they have value, that they matter. Because a lot of times being disowned by their family, then having these addictions, they feel worthless, they feel useless, they feel like their life doesn't matter. So when they begin to have people pour into them, when they begin to have people that are showing an interest in them, it begins to change something within, because they begin to realize that yes, they matter. Somebody cares about them. Because when you have individuals who feel like no one cares about them, I mean, they don't care what happens to them. They could go and OD, and who's going to be at their funeral? So just being there and being a part of their life is so integral.
Yeah. And I think it's a myth, and people can disagree with me on this, but you hear this said in AA and NA all the time, but the folks got to hit rock bottom. But I look at even in my own case, there's a hell of a lot lower that I could have went, if you know what I'm saying. Like I was low, but I mean, when I look at you doing time in prison, for example, that would have been harder than what I had to deal with. I could have been shot, I could have been killed. There's so many things that I could have been addicted for. You know, I know people that have just dropped off the face of the earth or spent decades in addiction, and so I've never bought into the you have to hit rock bottom, and I think that's bad information to families because I think that can often cause them to say like, hey, I have to step away and let you drop and do your thing. I get it, we have codependency and all that stuff as well with parents, but and I've never bought into that.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say it's more you got to be sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Yeah.
You don't always have to hit rock bottom. I mean, some people, it does take them to get to that point. But, as far as people, they just have to get to that point where they're sick of the life that they're living, and they have to realize that a choice can be made. And they have to make that choice. No one else can do it for them. They have to say, "Hey, what can I do today to make a change in my life? What can I do today? Can I go to this meeting? Can I go meet a social worker? Can I go to a church and have a discussion with a pastor and talk to them about what I'm going through?" And it's just at times, it's taking baby steps. It's not like you're going to be able to run a marathon tomorrow. It's a process. And too many people just want this like instant, like, oh, I had this thing, everything was gone, I'm good, let's go on with life. Some people that happens. Other people, it's this like lifelong process and journey that somebody is on.
Yeah, very well said. And David added, just contributing that as well. He said, the other David in the chat says, for me personally, my family had stepped back and showed me tough love when I was in active addiction. Honestly, it wasn't until my dad told me that I wasn't welcome around to when I reached out for help. In my personal experience, I had to find that motivation and want within myself to get the help that was needed. And I agree with that as well. Even in my case, it was a decision that I had to make. And when I knew, I that's when it happened. It couldn't take anybody else wanted me to stop or to change or wanted me to be different. It was the day that I woke up and said, "Hey, I'm done. I'm not going to do that anymore." You know what I mean? It was my responsibility for sure. You talk about survivor homicide. What does that mean?
Yeah, so survivor homicide is individual who is either being sex trafficked, sexually abused in a domestic violence relationship, and they feel like the only way out of it is to take the abuser's life. I actually have a presentation where I just focus on individuals who are sex trafficked or sexually abused. And in this presentation, I do 2020 and before and after 2020, because really 2020 and beyond is where the legal system and society has really gotten onto this thought process that there is a duality here where somebody can be a victim and an offender. Because before then, there was never this thought process that you could be either. There was this thought that you were the victim or you were the offender. I mean, Menendez brothers, they couldn't be brought up in the second case. Satoya Brown Long is another perfect example. She was just looked at this person that was involved with crime, took this individual's life. Mine and my brother's case, that we pled out, but it wasn't really a point where the district attorney or judges or anybody was really looking at what happened to us. But in 2020 and beyond, you have stories like Crystal Kaiser in Kenosha, Wisconsin, where she recently received a 12-year sentence or 11-year sentence, where initially she was looking at potentially a life or life without parole sentence as a murder. You had Piper Lewis in Iowa, who was a young Black woman who was 17 at the time of the offense. And she took the life of her trafficker, and she was potentially looking at this lengthy sentence. They gave her a 20-year suspended 5 years probation. That's unheard of for this type of offense. And so there is this like shift. But it's really important that we have these conversations, because we can't just make this shift and say, okay, everybody who's happened since 2020, we're going to show you grace. We're going to show you mercy. We're not going to give you these lengthy sentences. What we have to do is we have to look back at the folks that were in the 90s and 2000s and 2010s that committed these offenses and show the same grace and mercy towards them, because we need these laws to be retroactive. We need to be like, okay, you guys experienced this horrible trauma, you experienced this pain, this hurt. That's why you committed this offense. We need to go ahead and show you the same grace and change your sentence, or let you get out on prison, give you a commutation, give you clemency, and release you.
Yeah. Well, David, it's been a pleasure talking to you. We got to start wrapping up. If you have any questions in the audience, now would be the time to get them in. I want to shift gears just a little bit, and I want to ask you this. So, one of the critiques I think that most people that have anything to do with prison have, but that I have, and specifically, is when you look at a prison, it's like the gray wasteland. Oftentimes, you got little windows, you got, it can smell bad. You got to you got to use the bathroom in front of other people. I mean, this is just touching the surface of it. But when I imagine, if I was to think of a place where I would want people to go that need healing, and we want to call it rehabilitation, whatever we want to call it, it would be something that's a healing environment where, maybe there's nature involved. And I don't know, it's just different. It's a healing environment where it seems to be the exact opposite. I have only minimal experience in jail compared to you. I did 30 days once, and I've been locked up overnight 5 times probably. But it's like you said, even that is traumatizing in the things that you have to go through. And the way that, and I'm sure there's some diversity in prison guards, but the way that my experience was is they treated me like I was less than nothing a lot of time. Like if I had an issue or a concern, it was like, you're nothing, wait. And even I had a guy when I was in there for the 30 days, I had this young officer that was real nice to me and helped me out. And, I had to go to court. And so I was trying to get him to let me use some clippers so I didn't have to go in there, looking crazy. And the other correctional officers like made fun of him in front of me because he was helping me out. And I guess my question to you is, if you could envision a place where folks that need to heal from trauma that maybe have committed a crime, what would that look like?
I mean, when we think about that, all we have to do is we look at the Scandinavian model of prisons. When you look at their prisons are more like college campuses. The incarcerated folks have a key to their cell. They have big TVs, they have PlayStations. It's more like a college campus than it is a prison. They're able to go out into the community and go shopping. They're able to work and then come back. If anybody listening wants to look and see what's happening here in the US that's similar, here actually in Pennsylvania at SCI Chester, they're doing a little Scandinavian project. And so they've had this unit, I think it's for like 2 years now, where this whole unit is under the model of the Scandinavian prisons. The They have the same COs that work this unit all the time. You have these COs and incarcerated folks sitting down eating meals together every day. There's like this fish tank in there. All the dorm is painted, has all these different murals. The incarcerated folks are able to order food from the Rite Aid. I mean, from the ShopRite, which is one of the grocery stores here in Pennsylvania. And it's all about rehabilitation. It's about restoration. It's about preparing these folks to what real life on the streets is going to be like, you know? And it takes away this whole retributive thought process. Because when we think about prison, you know, in the 1970s, our prisons were about rehabilitation, they were about restoration. Then we went into this whole thought process that it's all about retribution, it's all about incapacitation, it's all about deterrence. This is what we need to do. And that's where we went from about 400,000 people incarcerated to about 2 million people incarcerated, where the European countries kept the rehabilitative model and they're about the same prison population, around 400,000. So, I mean, it was our issues where we wanted to be tough on crime. We wanted this drug war. We wanted to just go after super predators, which there isn't a super predator. And that's what led us into mass incarceration.
Very well said. And I think that we should all be doing a little reimagining when it comes to that, and not just accept what we currently have with the way we incarcerate folks. How can social workers make a difference?
I mean, there's multiple ways, you know. One, get involved before people go to prison. So get involved with school social work, get involved if you have your own practice. You can definitely work with individuals who have bipolar, dual diagnosis, different things like that. And you can get involved in different prisons, county jails. I always tell people that reentry needs to begin on day one. So it'd be important for social workers to get involved with working in county jails to help those individuals. Because when you think about county jails, at times about 70 or 80% of those individuals are never going to see prison. So if they're able to receive help services while they're in the county jail, that could prevent them from being stuck in this revolving door that is called the legal system. If you're working in prison, you know, be in a place where you can help heal those individuals with all the trauma that they've endured and the trauma that they see on a daily basis. Then you can get involved when people are coming home. You know, there's a lot of reentry organizations wherever you're at. Get involved and just begin to help speak life into these individuals that are formerly incarcerated, you know, and just help them in their transition, help them with the different aspects of reentry as far as getting a job, getting a house, you know, going to school if that's what they want, and reconnecting with their family. Because one thing that really helps reduce recidivism is family connections and family ties.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm going to give you the chance for the last word in just a minute, David, but I just wanted to say thank you very much, Mahalo, for the audience, for all your participation, the questions. There was a lot of thanks being appreciated. Kate said, thanks for everyone's insight. Yuli says, I got to get back to work, but thank you very much for sharing. Thanks for creating the space to listen to inspirational stories. Monica says, thank you for sharing your story. Appreciate the vulnerability and you using your voice to empower others. It's inspiring and much appreciated. Thank you. David said, I just want to thank you both for being open and honest with us. Jesse said, thank you for the conversation. And Alice said, thank you. Thank you to each of you for your contributions. Thanks, especially to Jesse for calling in, but all the questions were great. It was fantastic. One last word that I have, and people might disagree with me on this. It's sometimes when I bring these things up, I get shut off. But there's another person who is in prison, and some people may know him if you've been around long enough, but his name's Mumia Abu Jamal, and it's close to you. He's in, I don't know if I think he's in Philly. I mean, I know it happened in Philly, but I think he's incarcerated in Philly. But he's been incarcerated for like 40 plus years, I believe. And I wrote to him a long time ago when I was a graduate student and I was working with political prisoners, and just sent me a very kind message back, and I've learned more since then. And I heard he does some voice recordings that he delivers to prison radio. And I heard a voice recording of his yesterday, and he sounded very down. And it almost made me, I should say, it did make me tear up. But he's going blind, and he can no longer read his letters, and he can no longer see the television. He can't write. And if you can imagine being in prison for that long and having those things taken away from you, not being able to read the letters of your loved ones, your friends, your family, your comrades, that's got to be really hard. And I just want to say I empathize with Mumia Abu Jamal. And if you don't know about him, I suggest you look it up. And there's a press conference today. If anybody's interested, I could shoot you that over if you want to know more. But I just want to say, I just want to give my 2 cents here and just say, free Mumia Abu Jamal. Look him up. Like I said, if you don't know about him, look him up. There's documentaries on him. There's plenty of information out there. But yeah, I just want to show my solidarity there and use my space and my power to do that. And David, you got a website. It's right here. I'm just going to put it on the screen right here. davidlgarlock.com. So you can just click that link if you're in here, if you want to go to his website. Otherwise, I'll put it in the description. David, you have any last words you'd like to share?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely have to think about the political prisoners and the individuals that have been incarcerated for 30, 40, 50, 60 years. I did hospice work the last 3 years that I served, and that was some of the most beneficial time, but some of the hardest time. And if you think about our prison system, 40% of people incarcerated right now are 50 and older. And our prisons should not be hospice centers, should not be retirement homes, so we need to do better for those individuals that are elders in prison. We need to provide um, modes where they can be released. Most of these individuals who are 50 and above have served 20, 30, 40 years in prison. They're not the same person that they were when they committed an offense at 15 or 18 or 21. So we definitely have to think about that. But another thing too is I just encourage people, in the work that you're doing. Self-disclosure is so powerful, just from the beginning of this podcast, the way that Professor Ace was sharing about his own experiences, just realize the scars you have aren't just for you. They don't just remind you of what you've been able to experience, what you've been able to overcome, and where you are now, but you can use those scars to help other people who have scabs know that healing is possible. So use your scars to help people heal.
Yeah, very well said. David Garlock, everyone, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to get to know you. I'm sure we'll connect moving forward, and I'll be in touch once I get this produced and all the other stuff that's going with it.
Absolutely. Thank you for inviting me, and I have enjoyed the conversation.
Absolutely. Have a great day, David.
You too.
Peace, everybody.